welcome back to episode 3 of the Post Pete podcast. I'm James and this is Jack. And today we're mainly going to be discovering the realities of being a petrolhead, but also being a dad. And one thing that we're going to discuss first is a continuation of the story that Jack shared with us on the last episode, where he was talking about trying to buy and win back a car that he previously had. So, Jack, how did it go? What happened? Fill us in.
Yeah, what an experience. So, and again, didn't think it was going to be a reality until you know the kind of deposit was paid and funds were cleared and had the green light from the retailer. But so still even skeptical getting on the plane. So I guess the story started. So I tracked it down last episode. Negotiated. I think we
Just
got to a
remind us
point.
what the car is again.
So it's a Range Rover Sport 2016 4.4 SD V8 autobiography. So I'd owned it about, when did I buy it? About 5 years ago now. I think I bought it roughly and owned it for nearly 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years. And then part exchanged it actually when I went down the Carrera T route. So that was
Yeah.
what I bought after that. And I think, again, talking of the theme of this episode about dad life and car life with kids, um, it was always an itch I wanted to scratch, but also felt at the time it's probably just the wrong time in my life when I actually probably needed a more practical, more dailyable car. And within a few months of owning the Porsche, those times I took the Porsche out was fantastic. But I think on a day to day, I kind of missed the practicality of just having a larger car. So
Yeah.
almost kind of regretted selling it within about 3 to 6 months of owning the Porsche because we kept that nice as we discussed in a previous episode. So anyway, fast forward, tracked the car down to Scotland. So realised it moved from the southwest of England, the Somerset area, which is had a family who bought it and kept it for the last 2 years, and it had been picked up and driven up to Inverness. So the story continues of acquiring the car, speaking to the dealer, reserving it, and then booking a flight from Heathrow Airport up to Inverness. So I booked a flight from Heathrow, took off at 9 o'clock, landed at Inverness just before 11. Dealer picked me up, and it was the weirdest experience. I remember walking out of Inverness Airport, which is almost like a shed. It's like a bus station, right? Compared to Heathrow, which is this massive, bustling, T5. If you've ever been in there, it's a huge airport, and then you
Mm.
almost land in this airfield, and there's a tiny little terminal and the tiny little conveyor belt with some suitcases on. You walk out the other, and then you're out in the street. It's crazy. So
Mm.
anyway, walked out. Never been to Scotland before, so that was amazing. Just landing and looking at all the scenery on the plane. Walked out. The guy met me in the car park of the airport, and just
In the
walking up
Range Rover?
in the range. And yeah, just walking up to it was a little bit emotional, if I'm being honest.
Nice.
Seeing the car, the color, the plate, obviously you detailed it, it looked very clean, very tidy, but it just brought back immediately lots of memories, lots of emotions, which was amazing. And, I actually sort of stood there for about 5 minutes just staring at it, looking around it. And, there was a few familiar marks on the car. So it's funny going back to a car where you know where things had come from. The odd stone chip when you clean the car and you realize, oh, that's new. So there was
Mm.
still a lot of that history and those memories on the car, but also just looking around it, it almost seemed like it'd been very well looked after by the owner that had it for the last couple of years. So, you know, everything was as it was. And actually, I was expecting it to be a little bit ropier because you just never know who's going to buy a car like that at that type of age for that type of price.
So
It's
it
almost
wasn't on like Ling Long Happy Gallop tires or anything like that.
No, no. So we're quite lucky in that respect. Yeah, I was thinking maybe they've gone down maybe there might be some lights on, or maybe there might be some things that just need to be done. But the dealer gave me a hell of a lot of confidence. Before I put the deposit down, I was really kind of going through everything with a fine tooth comb to make sure that at least for the next 12 months, touch wood, hassle-free motoring, which, as we spoke about in a previous episode, is probably going to be you almost want to buy a lottery ticket if you say that owning a Land Rover. But anyway,
Yeah,
um,
I actually had a warning light come on my Jag last night for tire pressure monitoring system failure or something. So
oh
I've
no.
got my first issue.
Hopefully that's all you get for the next 12 months. That's hopefully quite a minor one. So fingers
Yeah.
crossed that goes away. Um, but anyway, yeah. So got in the car. And again, just pulling off, I just remember some kind of key characteristics with that engine, the way it kind of drives. You know, almost the V8s almost have a waft to them, which almost has a slight sort of almost like a hesitation. It's almost like it rolls and then it sort of takes off. So there's this kind of very glidey feel with those V8s, which almost makes it feel more powerful, but it adds to the character of it. I didn't think I got that with the 2 liter and the 3 liter engines and a lot of Land Rovers that I've owned before, but it's that V8 4 liter that just has this really nice feel to it, even down to like the tiny little feelings, like getting in and the steering wheel being like super thin. Because I know we talk about being very tactile in cars, everything being very digital right now, but we obviously want analog, we want dials, we want buttons, and that's still of an era where there was still a lot of metal, like physical knobs in the car that you could turn, and
Yeah.
everything's still relatively tactile and a much smaller screen than perhaps some of the newer models. But even just the steering wheel and the weight of the steering wheel, those kind of a thin steering wheel actually has quite a nice feeling to it. So went off, memories came flooding back of the car, dropped him off, did the paperwork, then headed down south. So from Inverness to just outside London, where we're based, I think all in all would have been about a 10-hour straight drive, but I broke it up by taking a few calls, stopped for some lunch. But the first part, I mean, I've never been that far into Scotland. So the first sort of 3 hours of the journey between Inverness and Glasgow was spectacular.
Mm.
It's like almost very mountainous and going down, driving down all these valleys. And, the weather wasn't particularly great, but, it was still really, really good drive. And then
But you're in
almost
the
got,
right car for it. If the
yeah.
weather's
And,
not good.
and that's, you know, I'd argue, you definitely get a Grand Tour and all these great kind of coupes, but I'd almost say that, the Range Rover does just eat up the miles, almost idle the whole way back. I know you called me halfway on the way back and, it almost just sits at, 70 mile an hour, you know, just over idling. It just purrs. It just sits there. It doesn't seem to struggle.
We did
And
compare MPG though, and I was doing significantly more.
I was going to say, what did you get from the Jag?
I got. I'm getting on a long journey about between 45 and 50, which is impressive for a 3 liter 2009 car. But yeah, 45 and 50, like at 70. So can't complain with that.
I was going to say, I was nearly halving that. I think at about 70, I was probably averaging 30, 31 mpg the whole
Yeah.
way back, which was a bit painful. So we had to stop twice for fuel. But yeah, I got back at midnight. And all in all, yeah, a really a great experience. I mean, actually, I think there's some value in traveling and picking up cars. But all in all, I'm really pleased to have it back, and I feel like it ticks a lot of the boxes for what I need right now. But also, it's the memories, right, and it's the history. We spoke about, you know, the importance between on ownership history of cars, and I just think that I've got some confidence, I guess, in terms of how well it's been looked after in the time I had it, and previous owner to that looks like it's had a good run over the last couple of years. And I now know what I need to factor in moving forward, and perhaps jobs that may need to be done in the next 2 to 3 years that I can start to plan for. But
Yeah.
I think this could be a bit of a keeper, a bit like your 911. Think maybe I've realized the second time round it's almost bittersweet. You almost appreciate it more the second time round when you pick up a car that you previously had some history with. So
Mm.
maybe there's a theme there. Maybe we should start buying back old cars and create a little, you know
Difficult to track them down. You did well tracking it down. I know that Joe Achilles, a friend of mine, he recently bought back his first car, which is like an old, really old now, like Mark IV Golf, and he's in the process, I think, of like restoring that and stuff. So yeah, fun to do if you can. I guess the reason you got it though, right, is because of what we're going to talk about today, which is the reality of being a petrol head, um, but having kids. And you have 4 kids. I only have 2 because I'm sane. And one of the things that people have said to me in the past is, what is the point in having a nice car if you've got kids? Because they just ruin it. Um, you've just gone and bought a very nice car. What's your views on owning a nice car with kids?
and four isn't the magic number, by the way. I think two is definitely the magic number when it comes to
I thought you were going to
family.
say you're going to have a fifth then for a minute.
No, no, far from it. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm very blessed with 4 kids. I'm very lucky to have 4 kids, but equally, it does come with its challenges because I think most guys I speak to, meet for the first time, you start getting into personal stuff around family, and the second you say you've got 4 kids, they're like, first thing that comes to mind is cars. It's so funny how that comes up in conversation so many times,
Mm.
and big cars, regardless, a 6, 7 seater car now, they're big money, right? Cars aren't cheap, and they're just getting more and more expensive. That we touched on it in a previous episode,
Yeah.
and I actually found a little hack. So rather than going out and buying a crazy a bus or a people carrier, we have for the last. I mean, I had it in the Range Rover first time round. So for the last 4 to 5 years, we've owned a multi-mat, which is a almost like a bench that goes across the back row of a fairly wide car. So maybe a 5 Series, kind of Q6, maybe Q5, Q7, Range Rover, Discovery, those type of wider vehicles, maybe. Um,
There's a guy on YouTube, Dad Cars. He has one of these. He's fitted his in the back of a Maserati sports car with 4 kids. So they
I know.
obviously somehow can work in slightly smaller cars as well, which is mad.
Yeah, I think I definitely took some inspiration from him. But there's a friend of mine that was also in a similar position where he had, planned to have 3 kids, and then was blessed with twins like we were, and that changed the game in terms of the car scene. So I think that's a big hack for anybody listening that perhaps, does want to extend their family but doesn't necessarily want to drive around in a bus or a people carrier MPV. So that's been a game changer, having that, and obviously you could use that in multiple cars, and it fits in the back of the Range Rover, so I can actually turn that into a 6 seater vehicle, so I don't have to pick a child or wife and decide to leave them at home.
And critically,
What
you retain your boot space, right? Versus maybe a 7 seater that you could use and lose all your boot space.
Yeah, so if I talk about, I guess, the family setup that I've got 2 cars. I've got the Range Rover now, and I've got a Q7. And the Q7, the purpose was the back seat, but like you just touched on, challenge with most 7 seater cars that we've owned. So we've had a Discovery 5. Before that, we had a lot of issues with Q7. Touchwood has been absolutely solid for the last sort of year or so that we've owned it. But the challenge you've got with most of these 7 seater SUVs is you have no boot space. If you've got both seats up, or even one seat, it's relatively cramped and uncomfortable. I think the Discovery did that job really, really well. The Q7's got a much lower headline, so you find that if an adult sitting in that third row is going to be very cramped. I think
Yeah.
the Discovery did that particularly well, but yeah, 4 kids does definitely come with its problems. What about you with maybe a more sensible package of 2? Is that perhaps the reason why you got the 911?
It was definitely a factor into getting a 911 rather than a Boxster or a Cayman, for example. I could have done that because, as I mentioned before, I'm running it as a kind of garage weekend car, etc. But bringing the kids along with me and having them involved in my petrolhead life is quite important to me. So yeah, I really wanted a car with back seats. Also, my kids are 8 and 4, and therefore they're at like the perfect age for a 911, whereby they can fit in the seats, but they don't have to have it. They're not still in these like massive rear-facing car seats. My daughter can actually fit in the seat without a car seat because the 911 seats are quite small, and the seatbelt comes down from quite a low position, so she fits perfectly in that seat as is, and my son just uses a small booster seat. So yeah, we've been on a couple of trips already with them in the car, and it's been really good. So being able to bring them along was definitely a factor. And it would have been much cheaper to have got like a Cayman GTS, for example, probably like £20,000 cheaper. It's not a £20,000 decision because it's obviously not quite the same car, but for me, yeah, it had to have 4 seats was one of the main criteria.
And what about memories that you're making, not just in the cars that you have, but bringing your kids into a car scene? How important was that? Is that for you? And I guess what memories do you have growing up around cars? And is that kind of the thing that you're trying to instill maybe in your kids to kind of bring them on the journey with you, to share maybe some of
Yeah.
your passion and experiences?
Yeah, my dad was always into cars. I remember getting into cars because he used to watch Top Gear every week, the old '90s version of Top Gear, and I watched that with him from the age of sort of 4, 5 years old, and got massively into cars and Jeremy Clarkson and stuff from there. He wasn't. He's not a petrol head to the same level that I am in terms of like he still loves his cars now. He's got some cool cars himself, but he he wouldn't spend his weekends like going to car meets that I do because I'm a real sado. But I like I like bringing my son along. My daughter comes to a few of them as well. I'd prefer to be able to go because it's easier, like logistically, to bring him along from a family perspective than to just not go because it's better to spend the time with the kids. So there's one element of getting him involved, and he does really like cars. He loves cars. Obviously, you're slightly limited in terms of how much time you can spend, and you end up spending probably 20 to 30% running around in a field rather than looking at cars. So the experience is slightly different, but it's still definitely better than not going at all and not getting involved. So that's what I do. What about you?
Yeah, I have to pick my favourite one. I think at this stage, I have to be mega select now. I think my oldest son, he's 5. My son and my daughter, you know, like going to these kind of things. I think the Festival of Speed was the last one that we went to because there was a huge kid area there. But I think to your point, I mean, it was a different day out. I mean, equally as nice, and actually those memories, were that that basically the Festival of Speed I took them to was actually a better memory than perhaps the ones where I just rushed around, got to all the things I wanted to go to, and then kind of moved on and went. So I
Mm,
definitely prefer the kind of family factor. But as you said, you probably don't get to go and see everything that perhaps you want to see because you're spending probably 30% of the time doing that and 70%. But I tell you what, the Festival of Speed was brilliant because it was so geared up to kids. So I almost think it depends on the type of event. Perhaps, I think
yeah,
we do lots of cars and coffees. I've done the scramble at Bicester. There's a lot of really good events now out there in the season that seem to be better geared up to having kids, where there's better facilities,
yeah,
there's toilets, there's snacks, sweet stalls, those kind of things. So it doesn't just have to be a day in the field with dad looking at 911s. It could be there's a bit more, diversity. There's more stuff for them to do, I guess, which is good.
yeah. The
Um,
scrambles definitely a good one.
yeah, and
Um,
it's not a full day out. I think Goodwood Festival Speed. Luckily, we had good weather, which obviously is even more important. I think if you're going to bring family and kids along to these kind of things, because if it's
yeah,
wet, then they have a bad time, and then you have a bad time, right? So if they're happy, then that makes your day even better. But yeah, I'd say those events are pretty well geared up. I would almost avoid any of the never used to take him out on those early morning joints that we had. It's a completely different type of event. Even if it was fairly static, still wouldn't do that. But I think if it was an event like the ones we mentioned, there's lots more in the calendar that I'm planning to go to next year.
yeah,
Then I'll definitely be trying to bring more of them along. I think my son's 5, but the twins are 3, so that's probably a tricky age because they just want to run in different directions at that point in time. But
yeah.
I think going back to one of the things you mentioned, so how do you maintain? So when you talk about family life and your kids in the car, do you have any strict rules, and how do you sort of maintain you know, the the, the interior and you know
Yeah.
the way you like to keep your car? How do you kind of keep on top of all of it?
Yeah, so you know this, but other people won't. I'm really, really on top of my car cleaning. Not right now, actually. All my cars are bad at the moment, but generally I keep my cars very, very clean, and I always have done. I take a lot of pride in that, and I really enjoy detailing, although time to do it is sometimes a bit of a challenge, as we've talked about. And I thought it would be a really smart idea to spec my 3 Series Touring, which is our main family daily, with oyster leather. And um, a bunch of people have said to me like, "Why the hell have you got cream leather interior on a car?" And to me, it's one of those things. The same with the rest of the interior of the car. If you keep up to date with it and you're cleaning it and maintaining it regularly, whether you've got black interior or whether you've got cream interior, it doesn't make that much of a difference. Because if you clean the leather, I don't know, every couple of months, 2 or 3 months, then you're not letting it get to a stage where it's beyond kind of bringing back, as it were. It's the same with cleaning your house or cleaning anything. As long as you keep on top of stuff enough, then it's okay. So I would love to be in a world where there was a rule that said no shoes and no eating in the car, but realistically, if you're on a long journey and your kids are screaming in the back of the car going, I'm hungry, which is probably most journeys in my family, it's just not practical to stop and pull over and not have food. So that rule pretty much stays with just the 911 now. There's no eating in the 911 and no shoes in the 911, but the
Where do
three
you put the
series
shoes
stays.
in the frunk? Do you put them in the
Yeah,
front boot?
yeah. And then get out the car, go in the front, get the shoes out, get them to step out the car. It is a bit of a mission, to be honest, but yeah, I still do that because in the 911 the seats are very close to the kids, so with
Hmm,
shoes on it would just be like kicking and scuffing and making them muddy and stuff. So I do that. I'm fairly chill with the 3 Series, even though it's still a lovely car inside. It's just the realities of life. But I think the key is keeping on top of the interior cleaning.
yeah.
What about you?
Any tips? Anything you'd particularly use? Do you have like a friend of mine's got a car vacuum
Oh
cleaner? What have
yeah,
you got?
yeah. yeah. I mean, I could talk for 4 podcasts about this alone. I have a George wet vac that I use for carpets and stuff,
Oh
which
wow.
is really good. That's really good. I don't use that so often. In the winter, in the 3 Series, we change the mats to rubber mats, and then I have like an interior cleaner product from G Technic, and then leather cleaner. There's a company called Doctor Leather. They make a
Mm,
really good leather cleaner, and then you can get leather dye block as well, which is particularly good for lighter colored seats, so you don't get jean dye transfer and stuff. So the other one that I do a lot, which has got nothing to do with kids, but I think it's really important, is cleaning the steering wheel. Like I absolutely hate sticky, shiny, candy floss type steering wheels. So again, steering wheel is something that I'll clean every time, every single time I clean the interior of the car. The steering wheel will get a good going over with leather cleaner.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What about you?
I'm
What are your rules for the kids in the
uh,
car? Similar or different?
I think they've all gone out the window the second we went from 2 to 4 kids. So I
Yeah.
almost feel like it's just survival now.
Yeah.
I'll tell you another observation that we've tried to implement more so recently is you go on a long journey and we'll like most of us, I think we're all kind of guilty of just giving the kids an iPad and putting a film on and stuff.
Yeah.
I've almost noticed that we've stopped doing that now, and to
Okay.
counteract the fighting and the arguing, we've actually put the radio on or put some tunes on. But we've actually noticed that the longer term, their sort of behaviour is a bit better because we always try to avoid the screens. And sometimes it's the easiest thing to do is just put a screen on in the back of the car. And we've actually got this arm that now comes out where you can mount an iPad to it, and it's almost like all 4 kids can watch this one screen. So it's
Okay.
great. It is good for like a really long journey. If you're going to do a couple of hours, then yeah, we'd probably swear by that. But I think
Yeah, we've never done that. We've never done screens. But I tell you what is massively different for us versus in the past was in the past when it was CD players and radio, it was
mm,
just you get what you're given.
yeah,
Now in a world where you've got, access to all streaming services, my kids want to dictate every single song. Like, right, next song I want this, next song I want that. And
oh
I'm like,
really?
you guys don't know how good you've got it. I used to just listen to album upon album of whatever my dad wanted to listen to. So
That's like I guess they got the dad approach in my car. Whereas my music in my car, but in my wife's car in the Q7, it's probably Disney. It's probably the Disney Parade song that they like the most. So we have about 10 rounds of that before we move on to things like Lava Chicken and all
yeah.
of those great hits. So
It's when you
yeah,
get to the end of the year and you get your like Spotify, here's what you listen to this year, and like all of the top ones are just kids songs. You're like,
yeah, I get it on a long journey, especially if I'm traveling for work and stuff, and I've got that Spotify DJ on, and you just the AI thing that
yeah,
kind of just creates your new your most listened to, and it comes up with a whole plethora of Disney songs for about half an hour. Um, so yeah, also just talking on the kids subject, what memories I mean do you have that stand out when you were growing up? Do you have any sort of family that were massively into cars? Do you remember anybody coming over, or do you remember cars being a part of your life as a kid growing up?
yeah. Not loads and loads to be honest, but the main one is probably that my uncle used to have a Lotus Carlton,
Oh,
which yeah, was pretty cool back in the day. Because my dad drove like the Vauxhall equivalent, just the bog standard like company car. And yeah, he had the Lotus Carlton, which he was. I actually saw him last weekend. He was telling me something like, uh, I don't know if this is correct, but the list price on that car back in the early to mid '90s was like north of 50 grand, which
that's a lot of money for a car back then, wasn't it?
yeah, back then, yeah. So
Yeah.
um, I probably didn't quite appreciate it for everything that it was. And I think the other thing when you're a kid is you rarely go for a fully sort of white knuckle ride in a car, particularly with someone like your uncle who'd be worried about, doing something wrong. But yeah, that was probably the main one for me. I always used to be really excited about seeing that because I'd seen the car on television on Top Gear and stuff. So,
Mm.
what about you?
I remember, so yeah, my dad was more into the Formula One scene and the kind of racing scene. So I remember going to a few F1 gigs and being around cars. He was obsessed with Ferraris. So I just remember getting dragged to Ferrari dealers
Okay.
on a regular. I remember going to the big place in Egham
Yeah.
near, not far from Heathrow, and there's a big dealer that's still there now. And there's a park that sometimes we go to with the kids. Actually, it's not too far from there. And every time we drive past, I almost have to pull over and just take it all in because again, it's
Yeah.
those memories of going into that place, 30, 40 years ago with my old man.
I remember going to
And
Brands Hatch actually with my dad. He took me to touring car. He was probably a bit more working man's
yeah,
racing. But that was awesome. And I actually took my son to Brands Hatch earlier this year. So that is another on the topic of where's good to take your kids. Taking them to BTCC is a great day out and they go for free. So
I almost think the grassroots stuff now is more interesting, in my opinion, than perhaps the big, um, the kind of F1 type of events because you can't get anywhere near any of it unless you've got a lot of money and you've got passes and you know the right people. It's
yeah.
almost become either just unattainable price wise or just inaccessible because you can't even buy your way in some cases. So the grassroots stuff, you can get into the pits, you can touch the drivers, you can get very close to the action. It's almost, like F1 probably was when we were kids, where I remember standing behind a railing and watching Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna and Damon Hill walk past and like high five your parents.
Yeah,
You'd
that
never
would
get
never
any,
happen
yeah,
now.
you'd never get anywhere near them now. So they're sort of memories I have. But yeah, I had an uncle who we're going to try and get on, who is a Porsche journalist. I remember him, he was car obsessed. And I remember he's 10 years older than me. So he, obviously drove. Remember him coming around at like my 10th birthday and he was only 20 and he had, some really interesting stuff. And I just remember, that being a huge part of growing
Mm,
up around cars, just seeing what he would bring home. And as he went into journalism, he'd always have a nice car, would always share some stories. We even did a segment for Autocar. This was when I was about 15, 16, learning how to drive in a Subaru STI. So I have to post some information on that up at some point. But I
yeah,
did
nice.
basically learn how to drive on a skid pan, which was quite cool, and not just a hatchback, but a Scooby, which was good fun. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, families and your formational years form a big part. And most people that I know that are petrol heads now have definitely had some sort of influence about it when they're a child. So let's hope we keep the flame going for our kids when they're older, having introduced them so young.
for sure.
We're going to try and finish this episode with in the style that we usually do, which is discuss when we think a peak manufacturer was. And given a lot of people would think to Audi when they think of a kind of safe, reliable, dependable family car, we picked Audi, but I'm not sure whether we'll necessarily pick the most family friendly one as when we think peak Audi was. So, Jack, peak Audi for you?
I am going to go with R8, just because I remember that car being launched, and I just thought it looked like a spaceship at the time. So I think I can't remember what motor show it was launched at, but it must have been the early pictures must have been around about 2004, 2005. The
Mm,
one I'd probably pick would be a 2007-ish manual V8. I'd go down the V8 route. Even though the V10 sounds spectacular, I think the V8 is, original OG R8 peak Audi for me. Very analog. As I said to you about the Range Rover story, it's almost got a lot of metal and less screens in it, and
it's got
very very raw.
metal gated manual gearbox, right?
What a gearbox, yeah. So and what an engine. And I think that shared a few engine shared with a few other cars of that generation. But I just think that for me, Audi, I don't think it made anything like almost like it was, at the time, I guess it was more supercar, but we'd class that probably more as a sports car now. It probably fit in the 911 segment quite well, but it was
It
just
always looks more special than a 911. Like if someone drove past in an R8 versus in a 911, you're going to be more wowed by an R8. particularly at the time it was launched as well. As you say, spaceship.
When it was launched, it just looked so modern, so futuristic. It was probably designed 10, 15 years ahead of its time. So I just think that's a really special car, and I know again they're starting to appreciate now. So if you can find a low mileage early V8 R8, I think you're doing quite well. What about you?
Would you go for silver for the full launch spec, or would you go something else?
I like a dark color, almost like a dark blue or maybe even a black. But
Okay.
yeah, maybe the silver ones have some more value perhaps because they are very original. But yeah, I'd probably go for like maybe a darker color if I could choose. What
Mm.
about you? Where was yours?
Um, I've never Audis have not massively been on my radar, to be honest. I think I've only owned one, and it was a commuter Audi A3 2016 that we got at the time when cars were ridiculously cheap to buy on lease, and my wife was doing a lot of miles for work, so we just bought like a 1.2 Audi A3 2016. Um, the one that I think I would like the most though is a B7 RS4.
Oof.
So I can't remember the exact launch year, maybe 2006. But yeah, that car sort of between 2006 and 2009, I guess. The one with the B7 with the lights that kind of droop into the middle in the front and the big round exhaust pipes at the back. That car came manual only, which in some ways, particularly for the touring, which is the one that I'd be interested in, or the Avant as it's called in the Audi world, um, only coming in a manual was an interesting choice. I think a manual estate car for me, just the two don't really go together. But probably I've never driven one, but with that engine, um, yeah, I really love the B7 RS4. I think it sounds great and it looks brilliant as well. And I don't think there's an RS4 Avant since then that's looked better than that car. So judging it on looks and sound alone, yeah, B7 RS4 for me.
Nice, good choice.
And probably, yeah, probably dark blue over tan, something like that would be nice. And I think with the wingback seats, although wingback seats maybe look better on black. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
I
getting
think
too detailed
someone on as I was doing my car hunting. There's a green similar generation, similar sort of age. There's a green RS6, so the V10, um,
now.
green with tan leather on eBay right now for sale. I think it's a lot of money, but it's timeless. So
Yeah.
very special car. Again, we spoke about this in a previous episode around the BMW era, but it's almost a similar time to that. So
Yeah, we
yeah,
seem to be landing on the same era. We'll have to try and pick another brand that's not from that kind of 2005 to 2012. I think
definitely.
it's just our era, though, isn't it, really? Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much for listening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And we are going to take a short break before the next one, but hopefully we'll be back with you very soon for episode 4 of the Post Peak podcast. See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.